Howdy, my name is Hayden Hutchison, and today I'll be talking about freedom of speech on public university campuses. I want to begin with a brief story that takes place at Evergreen State College in Washington State in the fall semester of 2017. Evergreen State has a long-standing traditional holiday called Day of Absence that emphasizes the importance of minorities on college campuses. In this holiday, traditionally Caucasian or white students are encouraged to take the day off of school, just to emphasize the importance of minority presence on college campuses. While I do believe this is a great tradition, what became of this holiday was an authoritative banning of white students on this campus. A recently hired professor named Brett Weinstein spoke out against this, saying that it was a display of tyranny and oppression as opposed to an encouragement or an uplifting holiday. And his statement was met with grave opposition, threats of violence, even some property destruction, and students picketing outside of his house threatening horrible things to him. While this is horrible, it's not so uncommon on college campuses. To quote Brett Weinstein in a speech to the U.S. Senate, "This committee should take my tale as cautionary. Is there a free speech crisis on college campuses? One can certainly make that argument. But that portrayal is at least as misleading as it is informative. What is occurring on college campuses is about power and control," and that comes from Breitbart News testimony. The issue today that we face is very pertinent, and I believe the restriction of free speech on public university campuses is unlawful, and I'll explain why. I believe that freedom of speech must be protected by law on public university campuses because it has legal and philosophical importance to public educational institutions. What I'm going to do today is discuss the current legal provisions laid out in the First Amendment for government-regulated establishments, and then I will talk about why these regulations are important at the philosophical level. And finally, I'll propose my policy that Congress should enact and all public school administrations should enforce. So let's look at what we know about freedom of speech now. Freedom of speech is not just a popular axiom. It is a legally enforceable principle on government grounds. To quote the Bill of Rights, quote, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances," end quote. That's from Cornell Legal Law Institute. So what is this legal precedent? Well, the Bill of Rights is the overarching authority on freedom of speech, and this applies on government-regulated grounds, like Evergreen State. While this is important, there are some very, very common and important exceptions that we should take note of. To quote Britannica, these are obscenity, fraud, defamation, or fighting words. And these are not legally defensible exceptions to freedom of speech. Basically, you're about to get into an altercation with someone and you say something threatening or violent, and they respond accordingly. While these are very important exceptions, they are just that, exceptions, not commonplace, and don't really apply to the scope of my speech, but are important to discuss. So sure, this freedom may be legally enforceable, but why is it important? From a philosophical standpoint, freedom of speech is crucial in a free society, because it is conducive to the free exchange of ideas and provides everyone the ability to express their ideas in an equal manner. So I would pose this question: how can an institution of higher learning and exploration limit free speech in such a manner? How does that stay true to their identity? Well, some people would argue that they limit it because it is threatening to the mental health of some of the students. While that may be somewhat true, it is not worth limiting the freedoms of everyone to remain equal. To quote Floyd Abrams, I would counter this way. Quote, "The answer to the suppression of almost any speech, the First Amendment answer, cannot be to limit expression, but to discuss it. Not to bar offensive speech, but to answer it, or to ignore it, or to persuade the public to reject it. I know that's easy to say, but it's got to be the way that we respond to speech which we abhor. What is unacceptable is to suppress the speech." This is from Foundations of Free Speech. And I agree with Floyd Abrams. The best course of action is to answer it appropriately, not to ban it. In keeping with this thought, I would like to outline my proposed policy to ensure that there is a clear outlined protection against infringements of the freedom of speech on college campuses. I'm proposing a policy that would be enacted by Congress and enforced by school administrations nationwide on public college campuses. It is very straightforward and simple. No establishment of government agency will enact any governing principle that may restrict freedom of speech with the provision of all current regulations and exceptions and certain guiding principles necessary to the education of students, for example, the classroom. This would be enacted by Congress at the highest level, but more importantly, it would be enforced by administrations nationwide, just to ensure that these colleges are upholding what is the most important aspect of higher learning, the exploration of ideas. The end state will be protection of this right across the board, and it will allow students to freely converse and explore more controversial ideas. I sincerely hope this policy will drive out the recurring incidents that we are experiencing nationwide, which I believe are unlawful, on public college campuses. I want to conclude by restating the logical progression of ideas that I explored in this speech. Like I had mentioned in my story above, Evergreen State College was an unlawful restriction of free speech. What started out as something great turned into something unlawful and abhorrent. I then discussed the overarching provisions under the Bill of Rights and First Amendment. Next, I explained why it is philosophically important to explore these ideas. And finally, I gave a broad governing policy that I believe would be most effective. I want to conclude with a quote from Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of Independence and advocate of intellectual freedom. Quote, "Our liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and that cannot be limited without being lost." Jefferson understood that when it comes to expressing ourselves, whether it be in public or as a member of the media, we each have a right to speak without the government's permission. End quote. And that's from the Pacific Legal Foundation. Thank you.